Before I go any further, I would like to ask the Executive Vice President of the University of Nicosia and the Director of UNESCO Chair at the University, Dr. Emilio Solomou, to say a few words. Please, Dr. Solomou.
Your Excellency, Minister Shah, Your Excellency, Ambassador Hassan, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the University of Nicosia. So on behalf of the university, as well as the UNESCO Chair, I address you looking forward to listening to I'm sure what is going to be interesting presentations which will enlighten us on the Palestine-Cyprus peace in the Middle East, which I'm sure you are such well versed in. I know people are here to listen to you and not to me giving a short address. So with this, once again, I welcome you and we look forward to listening to your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Solomou. Please allow me just very briefly to outline very few of accomplishments of Minister Shah. Minister Shah, Palestinian, he is a graduate of Pennsylvania University all the way through to his PhD, even though I also understand you're also an attorney, a lawyer, if I'm not
No, I got an honorary PhD in law.
okay, all right.
Second PhD.
As a very prominent member of Fatah organization, he in 1971 was the member of the Revolutionary Council. Later, he became the chairman of Fatah National Congress, then a member of the Central Committee, re-elected later in 2009. In the same year, he became the head of the Political Committee of the General Congress of Fatah and editor of its political program, and in 2009, Commissioner of International Relations of Fatah. His PLO position, his government position, I start from the 60s when he was a member of Palestine Liberation Council and head of the political committee. Later he became Director General for 7 years of the Palestine Liberation Organization Planning Center in Beirut and political advisor to Chairman Arafat. Later he became his chief foreign relations advisor. In 1989, he became member of Palestine Central Council. Later, he became chief Palestinian negotiator with Israel for 3 years, from 1992 to 1995. In 1996, he was elected member of Palestine Legislative Council. For 11 years, until 2006, he became member of Higher Negotiating Committee, attending Wye River, Camp David, Taba, Annapolis, and other major negotiation arenas. For 12 years, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1994 to 2006, Minister of Planning and International Cooperation, and Minister of Information. And the most highest accomplishment was in 2005-2006, when Dr. Shabat was Deputy Prime Minister and acting Prime Minister. But there are also non-political positions as an academic, teaching in Pennsylvania University, also visiting professor at University of Alexandria and American University of Cairo, the Dean of Business School and Senator at the American University of Beirut, founder and chairman Dar al-Fatah al-Arabi, the Arab world's only publishing house for children, founder and president of Team International, and chairman of the board of trustees of Al-Azhar University, Al-Azhar, the longest living surviving university in the world. The chairman of the board of trustees in Gaza of Al-Azhar University. It's quite a long. If I want to go through accomplishments, we need a separate session. It's with great pleasure, Minister, that we welcome you here and look forward to your speech on Palestine, Cyprus, and peace in the Middle East. Please, sir.
University of Nicosia, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure and honor to be here today and to address you on peace, Palestine and Cyprus. It gives me great pleasure of time in Cyprus. My first visit, I was 10 years old when I came first to Cyprus. And since then, I must have come 20 times in my variety of assignments. I came as a university professor, I came as a management trainer, I came as a minister of foreign affairs, I came as a honeymooner, I came to attend varieties of conferences, and I always felt at home in Cyprus. As a foreign minister, I really coordinated very closely with my counterparts, foreign ministers of Cyprus. One of them was Mr. Kasoulidis, who was foreign minister during the time I was foreign minister and deputy prime minister. And my instructions from Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas always included Cyprus. That is, when you represent Palestine in the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or in the Arab League, you make sure that Cyprus is protected. There will never be a recognition of the Turkish entity in the north, that you will never really allow anything that will affect the status of Cyprus and its territorial integrity and freedom and national unity. This was always a very important part of my instructions, and I think we always succeeded in doing that. We look forward today to an agreement of unity in Cyprus, as I've been told by your president, that might bring about peace through internal negotiations. But of course, to have full peace, you need an external type of solution also, which is something very much closer to what we are going to face when we really try to get peace in the Middle East through negotiations. But I'll talk about that a little later. In my younger days, the tall and very effective image of Archbishop Makarios was always an important icon in my life. It was Makarios and Abdel Nasser. I lived in Egypt at the time when we were thrown out as refugees from Jaffa, Palestine. But in Egypt, it was Makarios and Abdel Nasser and Nehru, and later on Yasser Arafat. These were the icons. Today, I visited his bedroom and the place where he worked and the place where he lived, while being honored of meeting the present Archbishop. But the picture of Makarios was always built into my images of bravery, leadership, and struggle for independence. But Palestine also got a lot of support from Cyprus all along the way. There was a time when our leadership was in Beirut, and then went to Tunisia to really be able to access the occupied territory in Gaza, the West Bank, and move from Beirut to Tunis, and from Beirut and Tunis to the West Bank. Cyprus was a very important stepping stone and a very important place, safe place really, for the leadership of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And I must say also, in every sense of the word, Cyprus supported the struggle of Palestinians for freedom, their quest for independence, and finally their quest for peace, for lasting peace in the area. I always, and I said that to the Foreign Minister yesterday, that to me, my basic supporters in the European Union in particular were Cyprus, you know, the islands, Cyprus, Malta and Ireland were the three real lobbyists for Palestine. I add to them Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a very tiny country, and you wouldn't really expect a country that is somewhere built in between Germany, France and Belgium to be a real supporter of the Palestinians. But really Luxembourg always was. Sweden was always on principle a very important supporter of Palestine in the European Union. But primo inter pares was Cyprus. And I could always go to my Cypriot counterpart and ask him to lobby for me inside the halls of the General Affairs Council and other councils where foreign ministers of Europe were to meet. I'm saying that because the reason for my trip this time was to make sure that that relationship continues the way it has for the last 50 years. And I am assured that this is going to happen. I met President Anastasiadis and the Foreign Minister and the Archbishop and the Chairman of the Parliament and the leaders of all your parties. And in every sense of the word, I feel absolutely satisfied that that relationship of support and solidarity and cooperation will last and will continue. And, it will not be affected by recent events that have caused some concern in our midst about the closeness that looked like between Cyprus and Israel and Greece, and accompanied by some statements that really put some real concern in our hearts. I tell you, after 3 days here in this beautiful island, I am totally assured that things will be all right and our relationship will flourish and will continue. And we will remain very close associates in the East Mediterranean, working together for freedom and integrity and unity and independence and peace. And I hope this time a lasting peace. I'll go back from Palestine, Cyprus to Palestine. And I'm sure you will be interested in following up the developments that put a big question. Would it really be possible to build real peace in the East Mediterranean, particularly starting in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? Is there really a solution? Is that solution desirable, and is it doable? We politicians really do not always remain in the realm of the desirable. You have to really go to the doable to see what can be done. We have been in a peace process for the last 24 years since we signed the famous Oslo Agreement. 25 years is a very long time, and really one needs to make an assessment. I mean, how well we were able to do and how much progress, if at all, has taken place as a result of signing that peace process in Washington, in the White House, with Mr. Clinton hovering over Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, and with all the paraphernalia that I'll tell you one or two of the funny things that happened that day. President Clinton called me to the White House just an hour before the signature and said, I have two requests and they are very important. So I said, okay, I'm listening. So the first request, please ask President Arafat to drop his military suit and wear a civilian French suit. And I said, no, President Clinton, this is impossible. I mean, I cannot achieve it. I mean, tell me the second one. And he said, second one, please no hugging and kissing. Just a warm shake hands with two. And I said, this is also very difficult, but for peace, I do. And actually there was no hugging and kissing. But President Arafat will not change his garb. To him, it was like the costume of Archbishop Macarius. I mean, you couldn't have asked Archbishop Macarius to wear a French suit as he became the president of Cyprus. And you could not have asked President Arafat to drop his guerrilla garb to wear a beautiful French suit. So we did. I remember when President Clinton came down the podium, I was in the first row. I was not on the podium, I was in the first row. He came to me and hugged me and said, this is in return for preventing Arafat from hugging me. So he paid me with a hug and said, you know, how do you find it? And I told him, President Clinton, you have not lost an Israeli daughter. You just won a Palestinian son. He laughed and knew the pun and the American implications of that. But we were very serious. We were really serious. We thought that this will end our misery and this will bring peace. And the Oslo Agreement, coming after the Washington negotiations, coming after the Madrid conference, felt like this was important, which really brings me to the global implications of a peace process and the global requirements of a peace process. I mean, we Palestinians and Cypriots really suffered from many global changes in the world order and in the global balance of power and its requirement. We were all affected by World War II and the aftermath of World War II. We were really quite affected when a bipolar world emerged with the Soviet Union and the United States. And changes in that bipolar world in terms of a detente or a confrontation immediately reflected themselves on the quest of smaller people and smaller nations struggling for their freedom in a very difficult world, run at the time by these two very important poles of the universe. And when that bipolar world ended in 1991, I mean, you really look at the dates and you will see that there's no coincidence here. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and the Americans won the global Gulf War, the war between Iraq and Kuwait. And as a result of these two incidents, the United States became the unipolar, the monopolar leader of the universe. It became the owner of the universe, really, in 1991. And at the time, that was employed to get the Israelis into a peace process in Madrid. I remember Mr. Shamir said he will not go to Madrid. And then Mr. Baker and Mr. Bush pulled out $10 billion of loan guarantees from the Senate to force the Israelis to come to Madrid. And with that, they came. Mr. Shamir came kicking and screaming, but he came. And when he came to Madrid, he declared on the way, all right, the Americans forced me to come, I will go, but I will spend 20 years negotiating. In the meanwhile, I will build enough settlements and bring enough colonial settlers, there will be nothing to negotiate in the West Bank. That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. And therefore, one really needs to see where these changes how these global changes and regional changes affect the possibility of a peace process. Palestine and Cyprus are not really power brokers in this area. We are actually really victims, much more than anything else. But we have to look into the changes in the global power relationship to see whether there is an opportunity, there is a chance. And that chance, for example, this coming of America into power, for 2-3 years, Americans utilized that power to try to make peace processes. But then they realized after a while that they have become the ruler, the most powerful nation on earth at the time. And with that, their motive to really listen to the downtrodden, the occupied, the victims, really went down gradually. It became a power game much more than a game of making peace in the area. And we suffered quite a lot as a result. And you suffered quite a lot as a result. Now there is a new change. The monopolar world is ending, is finishing. The United States as the sole director of the universe, I think, has ended. And it's being replaced by a multipolar world. It is being replaced by a group of powers, Europe in general, but in particular Britain, France, and Germany. You add the United States as a participant, not the owner. You add to that the Russians, the Chinese, even possibly the Indians, the South Africans, and the Brazilians. And you really have a new formulation, global formulation. And that global formulation may promise to become more capable of achieving that kind of peace than the monopolar world that existed between 2001 and 2014. The problem is we don't have yet clear rules of the game. That new way of running the world is under practice. The strategies require tools and require terms of reference and they require stated and accepted arrangements. This has not happened yet. It is happening. Proof? Success of the Iranian agreement. Success of the Iranian agreement was made by these players and not by the United States, as the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations really was run by the United States all through that agreement, and proved that the Americans are neither a broker nor an honest one. And they are a strategic ally of the Israelis. It is very difficult to see how we could have managed to make that peace process work by getting the only sponsor equally willing to put pressure on the two parties to make sure that they commit themselves to the agreements that were made. This was really never done. And therefore, if the world is changing today, and by the way, the next experiment is Syria. If the new arrangement for Syria succeeds, and it's difficult, it's different from the Iranian arrangement, because the Iranian arrangement, there is only one Iranian player, although there are multiple international players. But in Syria, there are several players. You have the regime, you have the civilian opposition, and you have the fighting military groups. And as a result, the difficulty for the Syrian arrangement is not coming from the sponsors, it's coming from the internal parties in Syria that really has led once again to the flare-ups and the very dramatic and really heartbreaking destruction of Aleppo. Really, the plight of the Syrians only remind us, because we've been through it before, the millions of refugees that have poured out of Syria, the destruction of exactly 50% of all their dwellings, and the result that probably would require billions of dollars to reconstruct Syria, need first a consensus on an agreement to keep Syria safe. Syrian problem has been exported to Europe via the refugees and via the terrorism of Daesh. And as a result, really, it has become a domestic problem in Europe. Syria today is not an international problem for Europe. It's a domestic problem. And it has aroused and probably will lead to serious changes in the power relationships inside European countries. The last local elections in Germany showed a drop for both of the conservative and the socialist parties, and a rise of the extreme right-wing parties, which are really building their case on the difficulties caused by the absorption of refugees and the increase in the terror attacks on Brussels and Paris. And therefore, really, that really supports my contention that yes, there is a new world, but that new world has not yet developed its tools and its strategies and its terms of preference sufficiently to be able to continue the role it played in Iran. And I think the achievement of the agreement in Iran is a historic achievement. And no doubt President Obama will go into history as having done that. Many people tell me, but he's also gone to Cuba, but I don't think much has happened since he visited Cuba. I think his important achievement was the Iranian agreement. But the conclusion of the Iranian agreement created new power problems in the Middle East. Problems between Saudi Arabia and Iran over the Gulf and other areas. And therefore, once again, the spotlights are not only on Palestine when we are talking about reaching a peace process that may work. Now, the problem that the Palestinians really are facing in achieving a peace process must be done by looking into where were we in 1994 and where are we in 2014. And particularly that we signed the agreement, 1993 actually, not 1994. It was implemented in 1994, but it started in 1991 and it was signed in 1993. And what really has happened? That agreement was supposed to produce the peace we are looking for. That agreement recognized the Palestine Liberation Organization as the leader of the Palestinian people and negotiated with it what became known as the two-state solution. Why is it a two-state solution? Because our Palestinian suggestion since the 1960s was a one-state solution, i.e. something like the South African solution. That is, why not have one state in Palestine for the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, in a non-sectarian, secular, democratic state that allows people to pray to the God they choose in the mosque or church or synagogue they choose, with absolute freedom of worship and exercise of religious duties and so on, but a political democracy in which you really have a one person, one vote, and you have a constitution that protects the minority in whatever situation, which is really what happened in South Africa. I was talking about Mandela just a few minutes ago before coming here. And Mandela really showed with his courage and wisdom that you can end an apartheid colonial regime and transfer it into a modern democratic regime, but never allow apartheid against the blacks to become apartheid against the whites. And therefore, you can produce a society of equality in a reunited country that was originally an apartheid colonial country. We were hoping that this possibly might happen in Palestine. Why not? It didn't work out. And instead, the Israelis insisted in separation. I remember a story I used to tell people back in the 80s and the 90s that why we want a one state. And I said, do you remember King Solomon? You remember the story of the two mothers who were fighting over one child? And King Solomon said, all right, I will cut the child in two and give each of you half of it. The real mother said, no! Keep it to her, but keep it alive. Don't cut it into two. I used to use that to justify why we want a one-state solution, but not a two-state solution. But when we had to accept the two-state solution as the only way out, I had to make an explanation. What happened to King Solomon? And I used to say, Well, I found out that land is not exactly like babies. Sometimes you have to divide the land to save the babies. A good try. I remember saying that in the first seminar that we had in the Senate in Paris, in the Senate, and there was a meeting of very senior Israeli and Palestinian leaders. I led the Palestinian delegation, and Shulamit Aloni and other important Israeli figures at the time, and it was a first meeting, even though they were instructed not to talk to us, to talk to the audience, but not to really talk to each other. And I recall Shulamit Aloni coming to me back to back and said, "Can we talk now?" So she cannot be pictured with a face-to-face type of conversation. We seriously tried to make peace with Israel. We committed ourselves to that agreement, and we did our best to make that agreement work. And it did work in the first, let's say, 3, 4, at best 5 years. It worked in many ways. The Israelis withdrew from the cities, particularly from Gaza and Jericho at the beginning. We were able to bring back some 200,000 Palestinians. We were able to build an economy, stretch our arm and make arrangements with very important countries. We became associate members of the European Union. We became associate members of the free trade area, Switzerland and Norway and Liechtenstein and Iceland. And we were able to get free trade agreement with the United States and Canada. All this allowed us to really go beyond the enclosure of the Israeli economy to our economy. And to do that, we started making exportable products like flowers and like furniture and like clothes, and we increased our ability to receive pilgrims and tourists to our religious places in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. We spent $500 million reviving Bethlehem in the Bethlehem 2000 project. We built schools. I mean, we built a school every 2 days. In other words, 150 schools a year. In the first four years, we were really able to have universal education, wiping out illiteracy and bringing girls from villages by building primary schools for girls in the villages to allow them to grow sufficiently for their families to allow them to go to the town for secondary school and then to the universities. We built 9 universities. Most of our university students had to go to Egypt or to Pakistan or to the Soviet Union to get, and our traditions did not allow too many women to be able to go to these places. But when we built the schools in the villages and the universities in the towns, today I really proudly say 64% of our university students are women. And that major emancipation of women really was built in through the educational system and then through the employment system for equality between men and women. We were able to build democracy, have a first presidential and legislative election in 1996, which was really only a year and a half after we came into Palestine. We established our own laws. We unified the legal structure. I mean, the amount of progress in the year 1999 and 2000, Palestine grew by 8% net of inflation in 1999 and 12% in the year 2000. The same thing happened to the Israelis. Their rate of growth in 1995 compared to 1992 jumped from 1% to 14%. They were being recognized by countries of the world, including some Arab countries, and they were really starting to develop their high-tech industry, which only started as a result of signing the agreement, the Oslo Agreement, and providing the kind of peace that allowed the Israelis to grow and be acceptable. In both cases, we were building a two-state solution that is viable. We built an airport in Gaza, and the harbor in Gaza was being built. And We built a stock exchange in Nablus, and many of the modern organizations that really build a state were done in the first 5 years. But then things really started to go the other way around. The major culprit is colonial settlement by the Israelis. The Israelis never gave up the colonial settlement of the West Bank. They didn't care very much about Gaza. Gaza is a very small place, very crowded with people, and it's militant. I mean, all our revolutions started in Gaza. Fatah started in Gaza, and Hamas started in Gaza, actually. And therefore, they didn't want Gaza. In fact, Rabin said, I wish Gaza would drown in the sea. I don't want to hear about it. And Sharon just abandoned Gaza. In fact, withdrew unilaterally from Gaza in 2005 and surrounded it, completely cutting its physical relationship with the West Bank. And by doing so, turned a physical separation into a political separation, which we still suffer from up till this minute. And therefore, with the high-speed penetration of the West Bank through colonial settlement, and particularly in Jerusalem, the Palestinian people could not really tolerate, could not accept it. They saw that their country shrinking at a time when we're supposed to be building a two-state solution. A two-state solution does not really mean a two-state solution, because one of them existed, and that is Israel. A two-state solution means building a Palestinian state side by side with Israel in peace. I mean, Israel has been there since 1948. In 1948, Israel occupied 78% of historical Palestine and made the state of Israel. The 22% they occupied in 1967 was not recognized by anybody in the world, including America. It is still occupied territory. And that is why we planned and got acceptance from the world that the independent Palestinian state will be on this 22%, on the West Bank and Gaza with East Jerusalem, its capital. This is where the agreement floundered. Now, technically, this failure of the agreement was caused, of course, by the colonial settlement program, but it was caused by the interimness of the agreement. There was no permanent agreement. It was an interim agreement, and an interim agreement that left control of the land and sovereignty in the hand of the occupier. And by doing so, let me just give you 3 statistics, and they will tell you what really happened over this period. When we signed the Oslo Agreement, there was 160,000 colonial settlers in the West Bank and Gaza. There's no more in Gaza now. Today, there is 684,000 colonial settlers in the West Bank alone. In other words, the Israelis used the period of non-implementation of the Oslo Agreement to quadruple the number of colonial settlers of our land. In 1994, the colonial settlers controlled 1.8% of the area of the West Bank. Today, they control 62% of the area of the West Bank. You have a problem in North Cyprus. It's about a third. The Israelis took 2/3 of the West Bank. It's both a crime. I do not condone whoever the doer. But the Israelis took 2/3 of the West Bank just in the last 22 years since we signed the Oslo Agreement, not since we started negotiating with them. Water, today the Israelis settlers take 92% of the water produced in the West Bank, which really means that 92% of the water goes to 680,000 settlers, and 8% of the water goes to 4.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. But this is unbelievable. Our gas fields in the offshore of Gaza have been taken over by the Israelis. We signed the agreement with British Gas back in 1995. We had the exploration wells, and we had started building development wells, and the agreement with British Gas was really supposed to market this well. Today, the Israelis just shut it down and took it over. And therefore, really, again, excuse the pun, I used to tell my visitors, we made an agreement based on land for peace. We don't have any peace, and the land has vanished piece by piece. But that really looks, I mean, if you ask, why are the Palestinians angry today? They lost their country in the pursuit of achieving a peace process with the Israelis. The Israeli occupation is total. You must have heard what we have done in the last 3 months. If you haven't, I'll tell you. In the last 3 months, President Abbas decided to renegotiate with the Israelis what is called Area A. Area A is the cities and big villages where all the Palestinian population, most of the Palestinian population lives. By the way, in the 62% in which the Israelis took over, there is now 400,000 Israelis and 100,000 Palestinians. So they already have a state within the West Bank in which we are a minority, as the majority lives in Area A. But Area A was supposed to be an area in which the Israelis do not enter. They have no jurisdiction in Area A, neither military, security, or economic and administrative. And we told them that if you are going to continue to invade Area A, why should we be responsible for protecting your security? We're spending 30% of our budget protecting the security of the Israelis. We have 60,000 troops in the West Bank who have only one objective, and that is to protect the Israelis. No attacks on the Israelis, no invasions of Israeli territory, and on the settlement. We pay for it, which is twice what we are paying today for our education. I mean, this is really unbelievable. Unbelievable. And yet, we were willing to be patient in order to get to a day where that interim agreement turns into a permanent agreement, and that permanent agreement gives us full sovereignty over our land, and by doing so, we end the colonial settlement project. This is the cancer that is eating out Palestine and making it very difficult to reach an agreement. If the Israelis want an agreement, they're not interested. The status quo is the best thing they could have, because it allows them to steal the land and the water. Why go into a negotiation that they will have to pay at least something? They have to put some concessions in order to reach an agreement like this. Is there a way out? Well, Paris has come out with a suggestion. It's called the French Initiative. By the way, I'd like to once also talk about, very briefly, Mr. Netanyahu's insistence that the only way you can negotiate that by coming to me alone, without any international partners, and without any preconditions. What does he really mean? He really means give up everything you earned in the Oslo Agreement, and in international law, and in Resolution 242 and 338. Don't tell me you have to build a state on the border of 1967. Just come to the table alone, without conditions, and we will see what we will do. But we've done that for 20 years. I mean, the Americans were chaperones, but really they just supported what the Israelis wanted. There is something called the Quartet, which is formed of the United States, the Russians, the European Union, and the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I am guilty of being one of the people who suggested it to President Bush and to Mr. Colin Powell. I was the Foreign Minister of Palestine. Why I suggested it? Because I felt maybe if we bring in the 3 other important powers in the world, that will reduce the monopoly of the United States. We should be able to have a fairer chaperoning, sponsorship of the agreement. But what happened? There were 2 conditions that destroyed the Quartet. Condition number 1, all decisions must be unanimous. So everybody has a veto, which means that you cannot make any decision. Anything that angers the Israelis, the American will veto. What really angers the Palestinians, Europeans or the Russians will veto, or the Secretary General. And therefore, the Quartet was absolutely, utterly, totally impotent from the beginning. It started its peace process. Today, the Americans have given up the role of being the chaperone of anything. They are out of this area of the Middle East militarily. They will not put boots on the ground anymore, and they will not engage uniquely alone to have any peace process in the area. And they really have reason. Iraq alone cost them $3 trillion. They destroyed Iraq, yes. They destroyed Afghanistan, yes. But what did they get? The American voters, and somebody like Trump, I mean, as funny or as queer as he might look, but he keeps telling people, we made mistakes. Had we not spent the $3 trillion on destroying Iraq, we could have rebuilt the total infrastructure of the United States. Fine. But the United States is not anymore going to have a peace process in the Middle East on its own. And that is why they sought the Iranian agreement, and that is why they sought the Syrian attempt at an agreement. A group of countries will take the responsibility. We Americans will just be a member of that agreement. When the Vice President of the United States told Mr. Netanyahu, maybe Mr. Obama is thinking of putting some parameters, Mr. Netanyahu told him, don't! I don't want you to do anything. When Mr. Ayrault and Mr. Vimont, the representative of the President of France, also talked to Mr. Netanyahu about the French initiative, he was a little polite, but very negative. He said, let the Palestinians come to me on their own without preconditions and we'll see what we can do. The same effort. But the French initiative is not dead. The French initiative will have its first exercise on the 28th of May. On the 28th of May, already France is inviting 18 countries. By the way, I asked your president whether Cyprus would be interested in participating because we are interested, and he said yes, but Mr. Kassoulidis will tell me later we can secure an invitation for Cyprus. I think Cyprus being a member of that conference is important to us. And if you are interested, it is easy to get. We already got an invitation to Sweden, to India, to Indonesia, to Brazil. And what the French are trying to do is they're trying to put a conference that is not going to decide, but it's going to heighten the feeling of urgency that you cannot delay the Israeli-Palestinian peace anymore. And you need to turn it into a real internationally supervised negotiating process based on international terms of reference and international law. Stop building settlements while you are negotiating and put a deadline so that you really, I'm a university teacher for a long time. Without deadlines and examinations, students will never study. And Israelis will never work hard. You really need a dead end. That's it. If you are going to motivate. And that's what happened. All these requirements were made to Iran and have helped support the Iranian agreement succeed. All right. If the May meeting succeeds, there will be a Congress like the Madrid Congress next September, and that would lead to selection of a smaller group of countries who will chaperone the negotiations and will enforce the rules of that on the two parties. That means you need to put pressure on the Israelis to accept this. Look what the Americans have done with Iran. They put $280 billion of sanctions to get the Iranians to go to these negotiations. Look what they have done to the Russians. They put all kinds of sanctions after the Ukraine thing to enforce getting the Russians to Minsk for the agreement. Without pressure, the occupier will not leave. And I'm not talking about violent pressure. I'm talking about political pressure and economic pressure. In Islam, there is a saying about the Prophet that he said, some people will not go to paradise on their own. They need to be chained and pulled in order to come to paradise. And I think paradise to the Israelis must be peace. So you have to chain them, you have to bring them in, you have to push them, you have to pressure them to get to a peace process that can produce results. That is the only political game in town now. But we Palestinians have many other responsibilities. In the coming months, we need to rebuild our unity between Gaza and the West Bank, between Hamas and the Palestinians. We need to regain our democracy by having elections in the West Bank and Gaza. We need to rebuild the PLO and its parliamentary institutions. We need to rebuild our economy to make it less vulnerable to Israeli pressure. We need to really increase the bond between our people in the West Bank and Gaza and our people in the diaspora, where are refugees all around the world. These are things we need to do. What you can do, we need your help. We need your support in the intricate political game that requires real lobbying inside the European Union and inside the international organizations and the United Nations. That is vital to getting the Israelis and to making them comply so that there will be an agreement. Number two, you also need help and support to really be able to achieve your problems in Cyprus. And Cyprus in peace and Palestine closer to peace are really the very important requirement for peace in the Middle East. I know the Syrian problem is acute, the Libyans are in a problem, the Iraqis still have not resolved their problems, but this is in the process of doing. There is no foreign occupier today in Syria or in Iraq or in Libya or in Yemen for that matter. What will remain is the chronic problem. And the chronic problem is the Palestinian-Israeli problem, but also your problem, the Cypriot problem, which I've been really very happy to hear from your president and your foreign ministers that the process is going on. The process is moving. There is a chance. We need that hope in Palestine. We need the hope that the international community is with us to give us, to regain to us our rights of self-determination, our right to build our own state, our right to bring back our refugees, our right to have prosperity and security and peace. But that will be also the promise for the Israelis. If they fulfill, they will also get peace. And imagine what the economy of this area will look like when these two pieces are achieved. Enormous for the good of our people, for our security, for our future. I wish Cyprus all the success in its endeavor. And I ask you to wish me the same for Palestine, because that's the road for the future. Thank you very much. I don't mind. Whatever you want. Okay, let's sit down. Question time.
The minister has kindly agreed to answer questions, listen to comments. So please, the floor is open. Yeah? Microphone or something? Please.
عندك صوت جهوري؟
I will try. I will try my best. So, Your Excellencies, I believe that we met 24 years ago in Moscow during the multilateral negotiation on January 1991, or 2, sorry. So we had a meeting together with yourself and Dr. Hanan Shawi, together with His Excellencies Mr. Reka. And I remember well, that we had a joint delegation with Jordan, and you said clearly that we are so close for the independent state, and only by this way we will have our let's say independent state. I'm representing the third generation of the Palestinian after 1948, and now already passed 2.5 generations. So what is the result of this negotiation? Actually, I'm a doctor of international relations. I had never seen such negotiations long like we have in our issue. So, and we again recall for the negotiations. Is there any hope after 24 years of negotiation with Israel? So, if you can give me a headline or let's say clear pictures about where we go, okay, as a Palestinian people. That's it. Thank you very much.
We want to go to Palestine.
I think I already answered the question. I said that in 24 years we lost our land instead of regaining our independence. And I think I've been as honest as can be. I'm not really drawing any imaginary pictures. But we made some achievements as a people, making a real try for an independent state. And I talked about it in my speech. I talked about what we've done in education, in the economy, in trade, in transportation, in bringing back refugees and so on. But that these achievements were almost finished after 5 years, and we went into the dreadful consequences of the colonial settlement.
There are no chances.
No, I'm not saying there are no chances. Look, we are people who never give up. Never give up. We struggled for 28 years in armed struggle. We were not able to liberate 1 mile of land through the heroic armed struggle that we continued for 28 years. And that did not make us give up. We went into negotiations again for 25, 26 years. And we achieved something. We achieved something from the armed struggle. We achieved recognition by the world of us as a people. We were looked at as refugees before.
But unfortunately, we have state without identity today. You know?
It's not a question of identity. It's a state without control over our destiny. This is the issue. We have an identity, but we don't have the means by which we can have real sovereignty to protect our land and our water. Now, therefore, I'm not suggesting that we give up at all. I'm saying that we have to start with ourselves, build our own unity, build our own democracy, build our own economy, build our own legitimacy, and go to the world asking for support. Both support to put pressure on the Israelis and support to start a process that may have a chance for success. May. And why I think it may? Because of the change in the power relationships and the diminishing of the role of America and the success of the Iranian agreement and the potential success of the Syrian agreement. That is what gives me some light at the end of the tunnel. But that is not going to happen soon nor automatically. It requires a lot of hard work. And part of the hard work is our ability to convince the international community, and a more important one is to build our own society, our own entity, our own unity, our own economy. Look, for example, at solar energy. Why do we have to pay $1.4 billion for electricity from the Israelis? We can build solar energy. Why spend $500 million on Israeli hospitals? We have 18,000 Palestinian doctors in the world today. 12,000 of them are in Europe. And therefore, we have to really look into how to make use of our own resources and our own determination and our own effort, but at the same time seek the support of the world. Seriously, in a world that is changing. This is really my message to you. I have no guarantee of success because I have been through the military struggle period and I have been through the political process, and it is very difficult to deal with the Israelis. Very difficult.
Yeah, but we had at least more than 20 years ago.